Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive with us.
Glad to be here.
And this time we're looking at something that you probably use almost every day, maybe
Yeah.
without even really thinking about it too much,
Right.
and that is liquefied petroleum gas, or as most people know it, LPG.
LPG, yeah.
We've got this really interesting recent report that really digs deep into the global LPG market.
It's a fascinating report.
It is. And our goal today is to pull out the most important insights and really try to understand where this very important energy source is headed in the future.
Yeah, we're going to try to give you kind of a clear picture of the current state of the global LPG market and then also what the future trends look like.
Exactly. And the first thing that really jumped out at me was just the sheer size of this market.
Yeah.
It's huge. By 2025, the report is projecting that it's going to be worth $134.68 billion.
That's a lot of barbecues.
Yeah, that is a lot of barbecues, and it doesn't stop there. It keeps growing to a projected $187.17 billion by 2033.
Wow, with a compound annual growth rate of 4.2%, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, that's really healthy growth.
Yeah. So the report highlights a few key reasons for this impressive growth. What are some of the things that are really driving this market forward?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is the increasing global demand for cleaner energy sources.
Okay.
And LPG is considered to be a cleaner burning fuel than some of the other options.
Like traditional fossil fuels?
Exactly. And then also we're seeing it being used more and more in residential and commercial settings.
For like cooking and heating and stuff.
Exactly, things like
Yeah,
that.
fair.
And then finally, it's also becoming more popular as a fuel for vehicles.
So it's got quite a broad range of applications.
It does. It's a very versatile fuel.
Yeah. All right. So let's kind of break this down regionally. The report goes into quite a bit of detail about different parts of the world.
Hmm.
So let's start with North America, where it looks like they're currently holding the biggest share of the market. Yeah, absolutely. So in 2025, North America is projected to have over 40% of the global LPG market,
Wow, over 40%.
which comes out to about $49.83 billion.
Okay.
Now, their growth rate is a little bit lower than some other regions. It's projected to be about 2.7% between 2025 and 2033.
Okay.
But their current market size is really substantial.
Yeah, that makes sense. So why is North America so strong in the LPG market?
Well, they have a really well-established refining industry.
Right.
So LPG is a byproduct of crude oil refining.
Okay.
And they've also been using LPG widely for a long time in homes and businesses and increasingly in transportation.
Okay, so they've got that kind of existing infrastructure and familiarity.
Yeah, exactly. They're already set up for it.
And what about Europe? Where do they stand in the global LPG landscape?
Europe is also a major player. They're expected to have over 30% of the market share in 2025.
Okay. Still a pretty sizable chunk.
Oh, yeah. It's a big market worth about $39.06 billion, and their growth rate is projected at 3.3% annually.
Okay, so a little bit faster than North America.
Yeah, a little bit, but still in the lower end compared to some of the other regions that we'll talk about.
Yeah.
So if we look at some of the individual countries in Europe, Germany's got a pretty big market at $7.73 billion with a growth rate of 3.5%.
Okay.
And then the UK is right behind them at 6.56 billion, and they're projected to grow a little bit faster at 4.1% annually.
Okay.
Russia is interesting because despite all the geopolitical stuff going on, there's still a significant market at $6.05 billion, but their growth is a lot slower, just 2.3%.
Right.
And then you've got France, Italy, and Spain all hovering around $3 to $3.5 billion each, with growth rates between 2.4 and 2.7%.
Okay, so it seems like Europe is a bit of a mixed bag, but overall still a major player in the LPG market.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting to note that their motivations for using LPG seem to be a little bit different than North America.
Okay, how so?
Well, Europe is really focused on reducing carbon emissions.
Right, they've been at the forefront of that for a while.
Exactly. And they're really pushing for cleaner energy alternatives, and that includes LPG. They see it as a way to transition away from more polluting fossil fuels.
Okay, so they're using it in vehicles and in industry as a way to kind of clean things up.
Exactly. And also for heating in areas where natural gas isn't as readily available.
Makes sense.
And the report even mentioned that they're investing in bio-LPG, which is a more sustainable version.
Oh, wow. So they're really taking it seriously.
Yeah, they're thinking long-term about how to make LPG even cleaner and more sustainable.
That's really cool. All right, so we've talked about North America and Europe now. Let's shift our focus to Asia Pacific, where it looks like things are really heating up in terms of LPG market growth.
Yeah, APAC is definitely the region to watch. They've got the fastest growth rate globally at a projected 6.9% annually.
Wow, almost 7%.
Yep, and they're already holding about 23% of the global market share. So in 2025, they're estimated to be at $32.32 billion.
Okay, so they're catching up quickly.
They are China is the biggest player in the region with a market size of $13.58 billion and a growth rate of 6.4%.
Okay.
But India is the real standout. They're starting from a smaller base at 3.23 billion, but their projected growth rate is a whopping 8.8% per year.
Wow, that's incredible. What's driving that explosive growth in India?
Well, a big part of it is government initiatives. They've got programs in place to provide cleaner cooking fuels to people in densely populated areas.
Okay, that makes sense.
So they're trying to get people to switch from traditional fuels like wood and charcoal to LPG, which is much cleaner and healthier.
And I imagine industrialization and rising incomes are also playing a role.
Absolutely. As more people move into the middle class and industries grow, the demand for energy goes up, and LPG is seen as a reliable and relatively clean option.
Right, so it's a combination of factors all coming together at the right time.
Exactly. It's creating a perfect storm for LPG growth in India.
Interesting. All right, so moving on to South America, it looks like they're a bit of a smaller market, but still seeing decent growth.
Yeah, South America represents a little over 5% of the global market, valued at $5.12 billion in 2025.
Okay.
And they're projected to grow at a respectable 4.9% annually.
Not bad at all.
Nope, not bad at all. Brazil is the leader in South America with a market of 2.19 billion and a growth rate of 5.5%.
Okay.
And then you've got Argentina, Colombia, Peru, and Chile, all with smaller markets, but decent growth rates ranging from 4.7 to 5.8%.
So it seems like there's pretty steady growth across the board in South America. What are some of the key factors driving that?
While government subsidies are playing a big role in making LPG more affordable for people.
Okay, that makes sense, especially in countries where incomes might be lower.
Exactly. And then in some South American countries, LPG is also widely used as a fuel for vehicles.
No, I didn't realize that was so common.
Yeah, it's pretty popular in certain areas, and that's definitely contributing to the overall demand.
Okay, so a mix of government support and practical applications is fueling the growth there.
Pretty much, yeah.
All right, now the Middle East seems like kind of an interesting case given that they're such a major oil and gas producer, but they don't seem to be consuming that much LPG domestically.
Yeah, you would think they'd be using a lot more themselves, but they actually only account for about 2% of the global market.
Okay, so why is that?
Well, it's kind of a complex situation. They are a major hub for producing and exporting LPG,
Right.
but their domestic consumption is still relatively low, even though it is growing.
Okay, so what's driving that domestic growth then if they're already exporting so much?
Well, the report suggests that it's partly due to increased use in the petrochemical industry
Okay.
and also for power generation within the region.
Okay.
They're trying to diversify their energy mix a little bit, and LPG is seen as a relatively clean option.
Right, so they're kind of looking beyond just oil and gas for their own energy needs.
Exactly.
Interesting. All right. And lastly, let's talk about Africa, which is currently the smallest market for LPG.
Yeah, Africa is only holding about 1% of the global market right now.
Okay. And what's their growth looking like?
It's projected to grow at a rate of 4.5% per year.
All right, so they're definitely on an upward trajectory.
Yeah, and their market size in 2025 is estimated at $2.96 billion.
Okay. And which countries are the major players in Africa?
South Africa's is the biggest market at 1.04 billion with a growth rate of 5.4%. And then Nigeria is the next biggest at 0.24 billion with a growth rate of 4.7%.
So what's driving that growth in Africa? What's making LPG more popular there?
I think the biggest factor is the increasing adoption of LPG as a cleaner alternative to traditional cooking fuels.
Okay, like wood and charcoal.
Exactly. Those fuels are really polluting and can cause health problems.
Right.
So there's a big push to get people to switch to LPG, which is much cleaner and safer.
And are governments doing anything to encourage that transition?
Yeah, they're implementing programs and investing in infrastructure to make LPG more accessible and affordable.
Okay, so it's a combination of those factors that's really boosting the market there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we've done a pretty comprehensive overview of the regional breakdown of the global LPG market, but now I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about where this LPG is actually coming from, the different sources of production.
Okay.
Sounds good. So the report identifies three main sources, and the biggest one right now is refineries,
Right.
because LPG is a byproduct of crude oil refining, and that's still a massive industry globally.
It is. Yeah, it makes sense that that would be the dominant source for now.
But what about the source that's growing the fastest? What's the up-and-comer in the LPG world?
The fastest growing source is something called non-associated gas.
Non-associated gas. What is that?
So basically, it's natural gas that's found in deposits that aren't directly linked to crude oil production.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a standalone natural gas source.
And why is that growing so rapidly?
Well, there are a couple reasons. One is the global push for cleaner energy.
Right.
Natural gas is seen as a cleaner alternative to coal and oil, and LPG can be extracted from it.
Okay, so it's kind of riding the wave of the natural gas boom.
Exactly. And then the other reason is that there's just been a lot more exploration and production of natural gas in recent years.
Okay, so more supply means more LPG.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. All right, and then the report also mentions associating gas as a source.
Right.
So what's the difference between associated and non-associated gas?
So associated gas is the natural gas that's found alongside oil deposits. So it's kind of like a bonus byproduct of oil extraction.
And is that a significant source of LPG?
It is, it's not growing as fast as non-associated gas,
Okay.
but it still contributes a decent amount to the overall supply.
Got it. All right, so now we know where the LPG is coming from. Let's talk about where it's all going. Who's using it and what are they using it for?
Okay, let's dive into the end user segment.
So the report says that the biggest user of LPG right now is the residential and commercial sector.
Right.
And that makes sense because it's used for cooking and heating and all sorts of other things in homes and businesses.
Exactly. And in a lot of parts of the world, particularly in developing countries where natural gas pipelines aren't as widespread,
Right.
LPG is a really important energy source for people. It's often their primary source of fuel.
And it's cleaner than some of the alternatives.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so that's the biggest user. But what about the fastest growing user? Where's the demand for LPG really surging?
The fastest growing end user segment is the industrial sector.
Really?
Yeah, they're using more and more LPG for things like manufacturing processes, industrial heating, and even power generation.
Okay, so what's driving that growth? Why are industries turning to LPG?
Well, one reason is that it's cleaner than some of the traditional fossil fuels that they've been using.
Okay, so it's kind of in line with that overall trend of moving towards cleaner energy sources.
Exactly. And then the other reason is that a lot of emerging economies are industrializing rapidly,
Right.
and that's creating a huge demand for energy. And LPG is seen as a reliable and relatively affordable option.
Makes sense.
So you've got a combination of environmental concerns and economic factors that are driving that growth in the industrial sector.
Interesting. All right. And the report also mentions a few other smaller end user categories.
Yeah, there's the petrochemical and refinery sector where LPG is used as a feedstock to produce chemicals and plastics.
Okay.
And then there's transportation where it's used as a fuel for vehicles, sometimes called auto gas.
Right.
And then there's a catch-all others category, which includes things like agricultural uses.
Okay, so it's quite a versatile fuel with applications across a lot of different sectors. Yeah.
It really is. It's pretty amazing how many different ways LPG is being used.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to step back for a minute and talk about the bigger picture. What are the main forces driving this growth in the LPG market, and are there any challenges that could potentially slow it down?
Okay, so the report highlights a few key drivers. The first one we've already touched on is the increasing global demand for cleaner energy sources.
Right.
People are becoming more aware of the environmental impact of fossil fuels, and they're looking for alternatives.
And LPG fits into that narrative.
It's not perfect, but it's definitely cleaner than coal and oil.
Okay, what else is driving the market?
Well, government policies and initiatives are also playing a big role.
In what way?
A lot of countries are actively promoting the use of LPG, particularly for domestic purposes.
Okay, like cooking and heating.
Exactly. They're offering subsidies and tax breaks and trying to make it easier for people to switch to LPG.
So that's definitely helping to boost demand.
It is. And then the third driver is the expanding use of LPG in both vehicles and industrial applications.
Okay.
So as more industries and transportation systems start to adopt LPG as a fuel, that's going to create even more demand.
Right. It's kind of a snowball effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so those are the drivers. What about the potential roadblocks? Are there any challenges that could hinder the growth of the LPG market?
Yeah, there are a couple of things to consider.
Okay.
One is the initial investment required for infrastructure.
What kind of infrastructure?
Things like storage facilities, transportation networks, pipelines, that kind of thing.
Right.
Building all that stuff could be really expensive, especially in developing countries.
Okay. So that's a potential barrier to entry.
It can be, yeah. And then the other challenge is competition from other energy sources.
Like what?
Well, natural gas is a big one,
Hmm.
especially in areas where pipeline infrastructure is already in place.
Right.
And then there's also the increasing adoption of renewable energy technologies.
Like solar and wind.
Exactly. So LPG is facing pressure from both traditional fossil fuels and the newer, cleaner energy sources.
So it's kind of caught in the middle?
Yeah, in a way it is,
Yeah.
but it also has some advantages over both.
Like what?
Well, it's more portable than natural gas,
Yeah.
so it can be used in areas where pipelines aren't available,
Okay.
and it's more readily available and scalable than renewables, at least for now.
So it's got its own niche in the energy market.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so looking ahead, what are some of the key trends that we can expect to see in the LPG market in the coming years?
The report highlights a couple of interesting trends. One is the growing use of LPG as a backup power source for off-grid power generation.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's portable and relatively clean burning, so it's a good option for remote locations or places where the electricity grid is unreliable.
Right.
And then the other trend is the increasing use of LPG as a petrochemical feedstock.
Okay, so it's not just a fuel, it's also a raw material for other industries.
Exactly. It's used to make a wide range of chemicals and plastics.
So it's a pretty important part of the global economy.
It is, yeah.
All right, and lastly, I want to touch on the competitive landscape of the LPG market. Who are the big players in this industry?
It's a pretty competitive market with a mix of large multinational oil and gas companies, national oil companies, and independent suppliers.
Okay, so it's not just one type of company dominating the market.
No, it's a pretty diverse mix.
And what are these companies doing to stay ahead of the competition?
Well, they're expanding their distribution networks, investing in infrastructure, and forming strategic alliances and acquisitions.
So it's a very dynamic and evolving market.
It is, yeah, there's a lot of activity going on.
And the report actually gives some specific examples of recent moves that some of these companies have made.
Oh, yeah, those are really interesting. They give you a sense of how competitive things are.
So what are some of those examples?
Well, Novatek,
Yeah.
which is a major Russian natural gas producer, reported increased sales and production of natural gas in 2023.
Okay.
And that includes LPG. And then ExxonMobil just completed a big expansion of its Beaumont refinery in the U.S.
When was that?
in March of 2023.
Okay.
And that's going to increase their overall refining capacity, which means more LPG.
So they're really ramping up production.
Yeah. And then Indian Oil Corp announced plans back in February of 2022 to increase their LPG bottling capacity in Northeast India by 2030.
Wow, so they're really looking ahead to meet that growing demand.
Exactly. And then there's a really interesting example of a company focusing on sustainability. Astomos Energy bought the first carbon-neutral LPG cargo from Shell in June of 2021.
Carbon neutral LPG, how does that work?
Well, Shell offset the life cycle emissions from the production and transportation of the LPG through carbon credits.
Oh, okay, so they're basically balancing out the emissions.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach.
It is. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. I think we've gotten a pretty good overview of the global LPG market.
I think so.
So to wrap things up, what are some of the key takeaways that you would highlight for our listeners?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that the global LPG market is poised for significant growth over the next decade.
Right, we saw those projections.
Yeah, and while North America and Europe are currently the dominant players, the Asia-Pacific region, and especially India, are going to be the main drivers of that growth going forward.
Okay.
And the main forces behind this growth are the increasing global demand for cleaner energy, government initiatives to promote LPG, and the expanding use of LPG in various applications.
Right.
Now, there are some challenges that could potentially slow things down, like the need for infrastructure investment and competition from other energy sources.
Right, we talked about those.
Yeah. But overall, the outlook for the LPG market is very positive.
Okay, so it's a dynamic and evolving market with a lot of potential.
Absolutely.
I agree. So as we think about this transition to a cleaner energy future and the world's focus on reaching net zero emissions, How do you see LPG fitting into that picture?
That's a really interesting question.
Is it just a bridge fuel, something to help us transition away from dirtier fossil fuels?
Po-
Or could it potentially play a more long-term role?
Well, that's hard to say for sure. I think it depends on a lot of factors like technological advancements and government policies.
Right.
But I think LPG has the potential to be more than just a bridge fuel. Its versatility and its relatively clean burning properties
Uh-huh.
make it an attractive option.
Okay.
And as the technology for producing and using LPG it continues to evolve,
Right.
who knows what new applications we might discover.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
It is for sure.
All right. Well, I think this has been a really insightful deep dive into the global LPG market. I've learned a lot.
Me too. It's a fascinating topic.
It is. So, for our listeners out there who are interested in learning more about this evolving energy landscape, we encourage you to dig deeper into this report and see what other insights you can uncover.
Yeah, there's a lot more to explore.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
You too.